Story 1. At 15, everyone at school had to do work experience. 2 weeks out of school working. Somewhere, anywhere. I tried so hard to find my own placement in something I was interested in but came up empty. I ended up helping out in a local cafe. Not exactly an experience, as I had already been working in a different cafe at weekends for 2 years. I turned up on the first day to be greeted by a foul, greasy, fat lump of a man in the most disgusting and dirty clothing and apron who grunted something unintelligible and pointed at a woman in the back of the kitchen. This nice and clean lady turned out to be his mother, the waitress. She put me to work cleaning tables, collecting and cleaning cups, plates, etc. The next day, they taught me the till and I served customers too. At the end of the day, I was to mop the floors. I went to the mop bucket and it was full of cold, gray, slimy water. I went to tip it out to put fresh in and the greasy owner shouted at me, "No, use that. I can't afford to waste money for hot water and soap on floors." I used the same water on the floors the whole week. By the end of the week, I was more than horrified. Bowls of sugar and condiments on tables were never cleaned out and regularly had dead insects in them. Crockery and cutlery are chipped, stained, and never cleaned properly nor sterilized. The kitchen area was the most disgusting I'd ever seen, with moldy food in the corners of hot plates and all over the floor. Utensils were never cleaned, just scraped. Food was often left out, uncovered. The fridges were not cold enough and food was thrown in willy-nilly, uncovered and mixed up, raw, cooked, touching, etc. The sluice room and bins at the back were vomit-inducing. The table legs had old food and fluff caked under them, and when I bobbed down to try and clean them, the underside of the tables had mold growing. I was reprimanded for trying to clean anything properly. The nice mother quietly warned me not to say anything either. I think she was afraid of her son. Tuesday of the second week, there was a phone call from the local butcher's warning there was a health inspector in the area. I've never seen so many people move so quickly. Sugar bowls were replaced, vinegar bottles were emptied of dead flies and polished. Clean cutlery and the good crockery came out. Windows were cleaned. The bin area tidied. Fridges cleaned and sorted. The kitchen was scraped, cleaned and polished. Clean aprons and shirts replaced the greasy, sweat-stained, stinky ones. The fat greasy ball even combed his hair. I was allowed to throw out the water in the mop bucket and use fresh, hot soapy water on all the floors. The cafe gleamed on the surface. The health inspector dropped by, quickly looked around, and had a chat with Mr. Greasy and his mum, filled in a form and left. By Friday, the cafe no longer had any shine left, and the mop bucket water was dull brown with chunks of food and grease floating in it. The flies and ants returned to live, eat, and die in the sugar and condiments. I'm sure the patrons never understood why they got sick. I was out of there, so relieved it was over. But I felt so bad for the nice customers. I needed to do something, so I asked my mum, who worked for a government agency in a hygiene-related field, how to report them. She helped me find the number and who to ask for. I phoned them and asked to remain anonymous. I didn't want to ruin anything at school since the businesses report back to them, and told them that they needed to make an unannounced visit, explaining the problem with friendly neighborhood businesses warning each other and the ensuing cleanup operation. I gave them the full details and the best day to visit. Friday lunchtimes were busy, so even more filthy. A week after that call, I was walking through town and noticed the cafe lights out and a notice on the door. Closed down. By order of the Environmental Health Office. Story 2. I work as a POS, point of sale, technician. My job is essentially driving around with a truck full of touch screens and receipt printers doing service calls at grocery stores, restaurants, cafes, retail stores, servicing pretty much any company that doesn't have its own dedicated tech team. Many times each day I'm confused for staff, and it's completely understandable since I'm usually behind a counter somewhere and screwing around with the computer. I do what I can to avoid customer contact. Dress in all black, no name tag, carry tools with me, avoid eye contact and get in and out as quickly as possible. This works most of the time, but otherwise I have no problem explicitly telling people, hey, sorry, I don't actually work here, but they can help you on the other till. My job is literally, I don't work here lady, the movie. Anyways, today I had a call at a grocery store because one of the till's serial ports stopped working. So basically I have to crack open the computer case, replace the screwed up PCI card, plug everything back in, install drivers, and then reassign all the hardware to their new ports within the POS, point of sale, software. This story begins with me just at the point where I've unplugged everything and have the computer pulled out from its compartment when I pop up from under the counter and see some lady unloading a cart onto the conveyor belt. She's on her phone. I give her a little wave and say, oh hey, this lane is actually closed, sorry for the inconvenience. But she continues unloading the cart. I point at the register closed little pyramid thing that's sitting on the conveyor directly in front of her slowly growing pile of groceries. She gives me a little hand wave, shoe gesture, and rolls her eyes, but continues unloading. All bets are off. I make a show of slamming the computer down in front of her. I unscrew the case, pop it open, remove the screwed PCI card. She's done unloading the cart and looking antsy and watching me. By the time I have all this plugged back in and turn the computer on, she's off the phone. What's taking so long? I told you this lane was closed. You should try the other lane. I already unloaded my cart. I'm not waiting in line again, as if she waited in line to begin with. Well, this still is going to take about 45 more minutes. You're welcome to wait it out. This is ridiculous. Where is your manager? In his office, in X city where we're based. I don't work here. I'm fixing the computer. It's going to take a while. She stands around for a good 10 minutes while I'm installing drivers until a manager walks by and she flags him down. She tells him about how rude I was being and how I was making her wait and wait and wait, etc. Hey, I told her the lane was closed. How much longer will this take? He asks. Half an hour. Okay, well, I'd be happy to help you at the customer service desk. Finally, some service. She loads her cart up again and walks it over to the customer service desk with a smug grin on her face. Like, lady, you didn't win anything. There were open registers the whole time. You literally wasted your own time arguing with me. Then did the exact thing you were complaining about, having to move registers, while feeling proud of yourself. Story 3. This happened when I was maybe 16 years old. It's been about 5 years, and I still try to find out if I was on an episode of What Would You Do? Characters in this story, entitled Mom, Little Boy, her son, and another family. My friends and I went to a small frozen yogurt shop. It was pretty empty with only one family and one worker. We got our yogurt and were sitting at a table chatting. Enter entitled Mom and Little Boy. The little boy is probably 5 years old. The entitled mother waltzes in on her phone talking so loudly my friends and the other family all turned and looked. She sits down at a table and opens her laptop and starts typing as she continues her loud phone call that I presume was for work. The little boy is clinging on to her leg trying to get her attention, and she is completely ignoring him. Like I said, it was small, there really wasn't any music playing that I can remember. And now we are all subjected to her business call, while the kid pulls her leg and whines for her. Mind you, they also haven't bought anything from the shop yet. After a while of ignoring the kid, while he continues to pull on her and try to get her attention, the entitled mother sighs, all frustrated, reaches into her giant bag and hands a box to her son and tells him, go play. The kid gets all excited and runs over to the wall, sits down and opens up the box. Now that his whining has stopped, conversation is a bit more manageable, and I try to tune out the entitled mother. Until I notice that the box she's given the little boy is full of plugs, tools, extension cords, power strips, you name it, and the kid is sitting next to an outlet. He starts by plugging a power strip into the outlet, and then plugging several more cords into the now active power strip. And I am watching wide-eyed. Like, is this really happening? The other family is giving the woman dirty looks and grumbling. making comments about the situation and generally expressing annoyance. The clerk behind the counter isn't really paying attention at all. I'm just staring in shock until the little boy starts sticking a metal screwdriver directly into the outlet. I'm not trying to watch a 5-year-old get electrocuted, so I run up to him and yell, "You can't do that." The entitled mother huffs, covers her phone for a second, doesn't even turn around, and just says over her shoulder, "Don't do that," to the little boy. I give the entitled mother a look like, "Are you serious?" And she gives me one back that's like, "What?" At this point, the other family is noticeably upset, and they leave the place. The boy is still doing dangerous things with the screwdriver and his other tools, sticking them into things and such, and I am very anxious. I didn't know what to do, so I called the police. The police asked me, a 16-year-old girl, to go into the parking lot and try to identify her vehicle. Luckily, my OCD brain was able to narrow it down to 2 vehicles that could have been hers. There really isn't an exciting ending to this story. My friends and I ended up leaving before the cops arrived, if they ever did at all. On the way out, I told the entitled mother that she should watch her kid better. She pointed to her phone to show me she was on a call. Yeah, I know, we all know, and gave me a dirty look. I hope they did something, and I hope that little boy's okay, but damn, what a stupid entitled mother. Story 4. Okay, so some backstory. This was quite a few years ago, by the way. When you're 10, and in the year before high school in my school, you get the chance to go on a school trip with your year, on a residential to a place with loads of different activities, like archery, climbing, and raft building. You also got to pick the rooms you're in, sorta, put some names down and get lucky, and I got very lucky. I was in a room with 5 of my friends, and one other kid who I didn't know very well, but had a bit of a reputation as an entitled kid. So here's the characters. Me, random bystander. Entitled kid, friend 1 and 2, entitled mother, and the teacher. So it was day 2 of 3, and we had just been to the shop. We had brought money for sweets, and I had bought small sweets called Millions. They are basically flavored chewy, tiny balls, and I had bought a large tube for £3.50, $4.79. We did some activities, had dinner, and were told to go to our dorms. But me and my friends were messing about in the park a bit. But we went back after about half an hour. We walked into our dorm to see the entitled kid throw something underneath my bunk, other side of the room from him. I was a bit confused, but I shrugged it off. Until later when I looked for my sweets, we were all sharing them, and I found there was barely any left. I trust my friends a lot, so I knew it couldn't be them. And then I remembered the entitled kid throwing something the sweets underneath my bunk earlier. Me, hey? What did you throw under my bunk earlier? The entitled kid shrugs, nothing, I guess. Me, quite annoyed he's not owning up. Why are my sweets gone after I didn't eat any and they've only been there a few hours? Friend 1 and 2, did you eat them? Entitled kid, no, I didn't. This went back and forth for a while until we were yelling, and I was very mad. Entitled kid, knowing he'd been rumbled, I only had a few, and they were all almost gone when I ate them anyway. Well, I paid $3.50, and I have barely any left. I expect to be paid or compensated somehow. Well, I've eaten all the sweets I've bought already, because I didn't bring much money, but I have 50 pence left. We knew he had more, but didn't go into it. Fine. Even though it wasn't fine, and I had basically wasted my money. He gave me the 50 pence, and we went home the day after. 2 days later, we were back at school, and the day had just ended when a woman, 50-ish, entitled mother, are you name? Yeah, why? My baby, entitled kid, says you stole money from him while at residential X. What, no? He stole my? No, he says you stole from him, and I want that money back and some more, because you are a bad kid. Friend 1. No, listen to me, idiot. Your greedy son stole from my friend, and he gave 50 pence, which isn't even a fifth of what he took. But that's not what my kid told me. Me, who had brought over my teacher in the time, the entitled mother was speechless. Teacher, what's going on here? Me and the entitled mother both told our stories. Then the entitled kid came over with a smirk on his face. "Teacher, what did you see?" The kid basically backed up his mother. Then the rest of my friends came over and started saying no. The entitled kid stole my sweets and the 50 pence was compensation, and the teacher believed us. Then the entitled mother started saying it was good her kid ate the sweets, because otherwise we'd all be obese, which the teacher didn't appreciate, given it was a school. "I'm going to need you to leave." "Ugh, fine. Come on, baby, we're leaving." Entitled kid, "But what about my money?" The mother, under her breath, "We'll get it tomorrow." I didn't see her the next day. Story 5. In the dot-com boom, I worked for a consultancy that took jobs to build websites. One of our clients wanted to buy a web content management system and talk to us. Consulting on purchases wasn't our usual line of work, but they thought it would be interesting, and I was assigned to the job as the technical person who would look at the options, make a decision, and write up a recommendation. I was pretty expensive at $300 an hour, which was a lot at the time. I had looked at all the commercial options, there were only about 8 at the time, and the client's needs, and determined in only about an hour that only one software package would meet their needs. But the client really wanted me to come to their office and let them call in all the vendors and conduct vendor meetings and show the staff what the relative merits were and convince them that my choice was the right choice. I had a phone call to discuss it with the boss at the client, told him he could get off very cheap because I could already write up the recommendation and be done. But he wanted me to come in person to do it anyway because he could be spending $1 million on the product, and a few tens of grand of my time was a drop in the bucket to get the staff to want to use it, and assured me that my decision would stand, and he would do what I recommended, but he still wanted me to come conduct the meetings to try to get staff buy-in. So his staff called all the vendors and scheduled vendor meetings, and I showed up to conduct the vendor meetings as requested. One of the vendors, I think it was the second, showed up. I walked into the room with someone, who wasn't the boss, from the client, and the person from the client, thinking they were being snarky, didn't bother to introduce me as the impressive, expensive consultant. They just said, "This is X," while everyone else was introduced by their full name and company title and their relationship to the project. I didn't bother to correct them, as this suited me just fine. I could sit in the corner and watch and not have the salesperson try to play to my expectations. The sales lady tried to play to all their expectations. The product was what we like to call fully buzzword compliant. She wanted to use as many possible buzzwords to dazzle the client with technical terms, whether she even knew what those terms meant or not. It has XML buttons. It has an HTML4-based processor. Oh no, we don't JavaScript. Our research shows clients don't like that. I sat in the corner next to the door, listened, and took notes. As we approached the end of the conversation, she asked, "Any questions?" My clients' people all had a happy glow as the dazzle them with nonsense buzzwords thing worked on them. None of them were technical people, so I looked at my notes and started asking questions to see if she even knew what half the buzzwords meant and why they were stuck together in nonsensical ways. "You said it has XML buttons. What is XML? What are XML buttons? You said it has an XML4 processor. What is HTML? How does that differ from HTML4? How can you be using HTML4 when it isn't even out yet? What is a processor? What does it mean to have an HTML4 processor? What is JavaScript? Is it a verb?" You could see the gears turning in the clients' heads as they realized they had just been bamboozled, and she had no answers and wasn't used to being questioned, even though she had invited it. She finally failed to hide her irritation, glared at me, and growled, "Who are you anyway? What makes you think you have the right to ask these sorts of questions?" I replied, "I'm the person who decides if your product gets purchased or not," stood up, and walked out. I returned to my hotel for the night, and never saw her again. Her product was just mysteriously removed from the client's list of candidates. Dumb move on her part, because I actually liked her product, and if she had merely been polite about it, I would have probably recommended against her product for this client, but recommended it to other clients, and there were more of them who would want her product than were like this one. About a year after I moved out, my mother's old Vista Cruiser finally gave out. My parents decided to sneak over early in the morning and take my Caprice wagon in order to replace it. They did not care that what they were doing was wrong, because in their minds, my belongings were their belongings. They believed the world should agree with them, and they were very open about their views on parenthood. That morning, my parents rushed into the trailer and ganged up on me before I was even out of bed. My father put his foot on my chest to hold me down while my mother looked for my keys. They told me, in a one-sided declaration, that they were taking the Caprice as their new car, and that I was just a foolish kid who needed to know his place and obey them like I used to. My father smugly declared that they were right, I was wrong, and it would always remain that way. They took my keys and tried to walk away with them, while my father told me he would be expecting the car's title the next time he came back. I shouted for my uncle to call the police. He hated my father even more than I did. Between the two brothers, my father had been the golden child growing up. My uncle took after his mother, while my father took after his father. You would hardly have been able to tell they were brothers by how different they looked. My uncle despised his family so much that he left home right after high school just to get away. He had tried to enlist in the military, but medical problems kept him out. Both of my paternal grandparents passed away in the 1980s. They left my father their house, while my poor uncle got absolutely nothing. He made his own way instead, eventually working at an engineering firm until his final year of life. The police eventually arrived, but by then my father and mother had already driven off with my car. Even when they knew the police were on their way, they looked smug before leaving. My father had a sinister grin on his face as he drove off, and my mother looked overjoyed behind the wheel of my Caprice. She had never owned a car with air conditioning before, so she was absolutely giddy about it. They were not difficult to find, since they had just gone back home with my car. My uncle and I went with the police to my parents' house, and the officers forced them to return it. For some reason, the police did not arrest them, though I really wished they had. Instead, they made it very clear that my parents would be arrested if the car was not returned. My uncle confirmed as many details as he could, because he had heard part of the incident when my parents stole my car from his driveway. He told my father to give it up and return the vehicle, saying that it was not going to go his way this time. My father refused and immediately tried to twist things into a his word against mine situation. He told the police that I had promised to give the car to my mother and was now going back on my word. I told them he was lying, and then I brought up how my father had stolen my last car. That was the very reason I had made sure not only to avoid registering the Caprice in his name, but also to keep the title far away from him. At that point, my father lost his composure and started shouting that I did not own anything, and that it was all his. That was more than enough for the officers to see what was really happening. I showed them the car's title, which was in my name only, and that was all that mattered. The police told my parents to return my car immediately. My father, furious, called me a whiny little brat and hurled my keys at me after prying them out of my crying mother's hands. Somehow, I managed to catch them without looking like I had even tried. That only made my father angrier, and he stormed back inside the house, turning on his stereo at full volume. My mother was practically wailing that I was taking the car back. She kept calling it her new car and insisted she needed it more than I did. She screamed, "Why can't you just do this one thing for me? I need the car," I refused to respond. When she tried to block me from backing out, the officers gently but firmly moved her aside. Even with the windows rolled up, I could still hear her wailing as I drove away. Later that same evening, my mother came over to my place to try one more time to convince me to hand over the Caprice. She attempted to open the trailer door without knocking, and then began pounding on it when she found it locked. I opened the door just long enough to tell her that she simply wanted a free car and that she was not getting mine. She then sat down on the hood of the Caprice and declared she was not moving until I gave in. I told her to go ahead and sit there and went back inside. I spent the rest of the night playing Super Nintendo and did not come back out until the following morning. I half expected her to still be sitting there when I woke up, but thankfully she was gone. My uncle later told me he had watched her from the window, and that she sat on the hood of the car loudly crying for about an hour before finally realizing I was not coming back out. My father later tried to fix the old Vista Cruiser himself. I never found out exactly what was wrong with it, but whatever he attempted ended up making the car catch fire when he tried to start it. The fire department had to be called. My uncle told me that my mother phoned him afterward, crying and begging him to at least convince me to let her borrow the Caprice. He laughed and told her it was my car, my decision, and then hung up on her. Yes, she tried coming over again to beg me in person. That time, I did not even bother opening the door. I told her through the door that I did not care how much she cried. It was my car, and I would never give it to her or even loan it out. She sobbed loudly, and soon after I heard my father outside yelling my name. I refused to go out, and I told them through the door that I was armed if they tried to break in. My uncle also called the police, who arrived and formally trespassed my parents from the property. After that, they did not have the courage to come back to my uncle's house for months. When they finally showed up again at my trailer, they confronted me with a demand that I start driving them too, and from the bar like I used to when I lived with them. I told them to forget it and take a taxi. They eventually got my mother's eccentric best friend to drive them for a while, but after a few months of that arrangement, the friendship fell apart. They eventually wore me down enough to agree to drive them again, but I made them pay me for my time. The satisfaction I felt from their bitter expressions every time they were forced to hand me cash, just to avoid risking a drunk driving arrest, was priceless. After about a year, they stopped asking me altogether and switched to taking taxis. The next car my mother managed to get was a little orange 1970s beater. I do not remember the make or model, but once she had it, she bitterly told me she no longer wanted my Caprice. Still, I could tell she was fuming about it because she often stared at the Caprice with longing in her eyes. She had a strange love for station wagons, and I suppose I inherited that trait because most of my vehicles since then have been wagons. She always looked happy yet jealous whenever she rode in my Caprice. She liked stretching out in the back seat as if it were a limousine. I am sure, in her mind, it was the car she believed should have been hers. The little orange car's engine eventually blew because my mother had a heavy foot on the gas pedal, and both of my parents were notoriously stingy about maintenance. After that, she ended up with another Vista Cruiser. I am not sure of the year, likely mid-1970s. From then on, she pretended the Caprice was not anything special, but it was clear she still secretly wanted it. Because word spread about the things my parents had done to me. Several ugly family confrontations happened over the years. The worst was at our family reunion in the mid-1990s. My mother repeatedly turned on the waterworks to fish for sympathy whenever anyone brought up her past behavior. She especially tried this whenever the subject of the Caprice came up. She kept saying she only did what she did because she needed the car, and she even cried that it was not too much to ask since she had given birth to me and raised me. At one point, one of her cousins actually slapped her and told her she was a terrible mother. They added that if they had known all the things I endured as a child much sooner, they would have taken me away from my parents. That sent my mother running off in tears. My father used her exit as an excuse to lay into me. He loudly said I should still give the Caprice to my mother for all the supposed pain and suffering I had caused her. I just kept repeating "nope" over and over again while he got redder in the face until he looked like a matchstick. Finally, he stormed out when he realized everyone else was staring at him and mocking him. The older I got, the less of his nonsense I tolerated. In fact, it was almost amusing to see the realization dawn on him again and again whenever he discovered he could no longer make me do whatever he wanted. As I got stronger and he grew weaker with age, his influence faded. He had size on his side, but he rarely exercised aside from occasionally hitting his punching bag. Meanwhile, I became a regular at the gym. Hatred, as it turned out, was a powerful motivator to get into shape. About 5 years after I bought it, the junkyard engine in my Caprice was on its last legs. I had two choices: pay a mechanic to replace the engine with another used V8, or simply get another car. The Caprice was already showing its age and wearing down, So I made what I thought was a smart decision at the time. I traded it in for a Yugo at a used car dealership. Yes, I know, that was a mistake. But it was cheap, and I figured I would save money on gas. Unfortunately, that Yugo became my biggest regret during the time I owned it. It was painfully slow, incredibly cramped, had no air conditioning, and even had wires hanging down under the central part of the dashboard. I was told it had actually been manufactured that way, if you can believe it. Things constantly broke on that car. It was not exactly a vehicle that earned respect from anyone. In fact, I was laughed at more than once, mostly by teenagers who spotted me driving it. Needless to say, I got rid of the Yugo as soon as I could. A strange collector offered me $100 for it, which was better than nothing. After that, I bought a Volvo wagon, which was a huge improvement. It was reliable, roomy, and had excellent air conditioning. I even considered giving the Yugo to my mother as a joke, but selling it to the collector was a better option. The Volvo, however, reignited the same family conflict all over again. When my mother saw the Volvo, she practically obsessed over it. She cried when I refused to let her drive it. My father tried to storm in, acting like a gorilla, demanding that I give my mother what she wanted, until I grabbed him by the shirt and told him to give me a reason. He looked me in the eyes, saw I was serious, and backed down in defeat. My mother, however, continued crying at him, begging him to turn around and put me back in my place as they left. She came back later and once again demanded that I let her use the Volvo. I told her she should have realized by then that she could not force me to do anything anymore. She had another dramatic crying episode, sitting on the hood just like she had done with the Caprice. That time, however, a police officer eventually showed up. I do not know who called him, but my mother must have put on an impressive act. She convinced the officer that I had promised her the car and then gone back on my word. The officer came banging on my trailer door, demanding I come outside and apologize to my mother. When I asked what she had told him, he said she claimed I was a lying little brat who had promised to give her a car and then reneged. I calmly explained the full story in front of her, and the officer looked mortified. My mother tried to interrupt many times, but it did not work. By the time I finished, she was glaring daggers at us both before storming off without another word. The officer apologized to me, admitting my mother had been extremely convincing. She never asked to drive my Volvo again. Not long after I settled into driving the Volvo, my uncle became very ill. He had been like a second father to me and was one of the few family members who openly supported me. When his health declined, I visited him often, helping out however I could. My parents, on the other hand, barely lifted a finger for him. When my uncle passed away, I was devastated. The loss hit me harder than I expected, but I took some comfort in knowing that he had left me something in his will. He left me his old pickup truck, which I cherished. It was not just a vehicle, it was a piece of him that I could hold on to. The moment my father found out, he exploded. He shouted that the truck should have gone to him and that it was not fair that I got it. He said that if I had any respect for my family, I would hand the truck over immediately. I told him straight out, no. Uncle left it to me, and that's final. He tried to intimidate me with his usual routine, raising his voice, puffing out his chest, and trying to corner me, but I stood my ground. By that point, I was taller, stronger, and no longer scared of him. When he realized that, he stormed off in anger. My mother, of course, took his side and cried that I was selfish for not giving my father what he wanted. I did not care. That truck meant the world to me, and I was not going to let anyone take it. After the dispute over my uncle's truck, things between me and my parents became even more strained. They still tried their old tricks: guilt trips, dramatic crying fits, and sudden demands for money or favors, but I no longer played along. Every time they tried to push me back into the role of the obedient child, I refused. My father, once so full of bluster, began to realize he could not physically or mentally intimidate me anymore. The more he tried, the more it backfired. Eventually, he stopped trying altogether, though not without bitterness. My mother, on the other hand, never stopped. She always found some excuse to knock on my door. usually with tears in her eyes and a story about how I owed her something. The family gatherings grew more and more uncomfortable. Relatives had heard enough of their behavior to stop siding with them, which only made my parents more resentful toward me. They painted me as the ungrateful child to anyone who would listen, but the truth always slipped out. People knew better by then. As the years passed, the distance between us widened. I stopped answering their calls as often and limited visits to the bare minimum. Whenever I did see them, the conversations were the same: they wanted something, and I said no. That became the pattern of our relationship. In a way, it was freeing. The less power they had over me, the more I built my own life, my own stability, and my own strength. They no longer held the strings, and I was finally able to breathe without the constant weight of their demands. As time went on, my parents' health began to decline. My father grew weaker with age, and the man who once tried to intimidate everyone now struggled just to keep up with daily life. He still carried bitterness toward me, but it no longer had the fire it once did. By the end, his anger was mostly just words without power. My mother, however, never stopped playing the same role she always had. Even as she got older, she tried to guilt me into handing over things or bending to her will. The crying fits, the claims of being wronged, and the dramatic stories continued right up until her last days. It was as if she did not know how to exist without trying to manipulate someone. When my father eventually passed, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and even a sense of closure. I did not mourn him in the traditional sense, but I acknowledged the complicated role he had played in my life. With my mother, it was different. By the time she passed, our relationship had been broken for so long that I felt more numb than anything else. I stood at both of their funerals, not as the grieving child they might have expected, but as someone who had survived their storms. Many family members came up to me, some expressing sympathy, others quietly admitting they understood why I had kept my distance. In the end, what I felt most was freedom. Their passing closed a chapter that had been open for far too long. I finally had the peace that had been denied to me throughout my childhood and much of my adult life. Looking back now, I can see how much those battles with my parents shaped me. The caprice, of all things, became a symbol of everything I had to fight for. It was never really about the car itself, it was about control, independence, and the right to live my own life without being treated like a servant to their demands. My father tried to rule through fear, and my mother tried to rule through guilt, but in the end, neither worked once I found my strength. I learned that standing your ground is not always easy, but it is necessary if you want to build a life on your own terms. The fights, the tears, the constant manipulation, they all taught me what I would never become. I refused to carry their patterns into my own life. And while I may not have had the most supportive parents, I found strength in myself, in my work, and in the people who did stand by me, like my uncle. The caprice is long gone, as are the other cars that came and went. But the memory of those days stays with me. Whenever I think back to my mother sitting on the hood, crying for something that was never hers, or my father turning red in the face because I would no longer bend to his will, I feel a strange kind of victory. I may not have had the family life most people hope for, but I carved my own path out of the chaos. In the end, that is what truly matters. I survived, I endured, and I refused to let them break me.